This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Do you ever find yourself playing the budgeting game? Well, with the Name Your Price tool from Progressive, you can find options that fit your budget and potentially lower your bills. Try it at progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Price and coverage match limited by state law. Not available in all states.
Hey, I'm Ryan Reynolds.
Recently, I asked Mint Mobile's legal team if big wireless companies are allowed to raise prices due to inflation. They said yes. And then when I asked if raising prices technically violates those onerous two-year contracts, they said, "What the f*** are you talking about, you insane Hollywood ass?" So to recap, we're cutting the price of Mint Unlimited from $30 a month to just $15 a month.
Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
$45 upfront payment equivalent to $15 per month. New customers on first 3-month plan only. Taxes and fees extra. Speed slower above 40 gigabytes. See details.
Hello and welcome to this very special bonus episode of Real Life Ghost Stories, where I am a guest on the podcast Rattled and Shook. Now, when Rattled and Shook reached out to me and said, "Hey, would you like to come and be a guest on an episode of the podcast?" I jumped at the chance because Rattled and Shook is made by the same people who make Radio Rental, and you guys know that I am obsessed with Radio Rental. I absolutely adore it. So Rattled and Shook is a weekly discussion-based horror comedy podcast. Think of it as a variety show for all things creepy adjacent and horror-lite. Join hosts Aprile and Meredith every week for new scary stories, horror-themed games, special guests, and more. The show harkens back to old radio programs of the past with fun sound design and score. Each episode, Aprile and Meredith will immerse themselves in new scary stories and react in real time. Featured stories include haunted houses, creepy encounters, and supernatural experiences. Tune in for an all-round good time. Now, the team at Rattled and Shook sent me over the episode that I did with them as a guest on their podcast, and I was like, I would love to put this in my feed as a bonus episode for my listeners so that they can hear exactly what Rattled and Shook is all about. So you'll be hearing this episode in their style. As always with these episodes, I will leave the link to where you can find all of the information you need about Rattled and Shook in the description of this episode. Please do go and check out Rattled and Shook, listen to their podcast episodes, and I hope that you enjoy this one.
And now, presenting Rattled and Shook.
Hi, I'm Meredith.
And I'm Emma.
And this is Rattled and Shook, a podcast where we tune into scary stories and discuss our deepest, darkest fears.
But in a fun way.
Thank you so much for joining, Emma. I'm really excited to have you here with Rattled and Shook.
Oh, I'm so excited to be here. Thank you for inviting me on.
And so Emma has a spooky podcast of her own. Would you care to elaborate?
Yes, so I've got a podcast called Real Life Ghost Stories, where, if you can believe it, I tell real life ghost stories.
Amazing.
I know.
Shocker.
Does exactly what it says on the tin. So I have been doing real life ghost stories for 6 years. And as I just said to Meredith, I've recorded nearly 900 episodes at this stage. So if you are interested in diving into some sort of narrative style ghost stories, there's a lot of back catalogue for you to get through.
Kudos. And so firstly, to address, you have an accent. Maybe you could mention where you're based.
Yes. So I am Irish. I was born and raised in Ireland, but I don't live in Ireland currently. I currently live in England, in a little place in the southeast of England called Canterbury. But I have not lost any of my Irish accent, not even the littlest bit.
Canterbury. Is this like the setting from Chaucer?
Yes, it is.
Canterbury Tales?
Yes, it is. Yeah.
Okay.
So the Canterbury Tales is based on pilgrims that used to come to Canterbury. People would come on a big pilgrimage to see the cathedral back in the day. And Chaucer wrote his Canterbury Tales about different people who came on pilgrimages, basically.
Wow, it just sent me right back to high school English with that.
Yeah. And
It's
I
been a
used to
while.
be an English teacher.
No way.
I was a secondary school teacher for a really long time. And, Chaucer's great and all, but like, it's hard work.
Yeah, I think it's kind of charming.
Yeah, it's definitely charming.
So how did you get into ghost stories, ghostliness in general?
I kind of think it's in my blood. Irish people we're just storytellers by heart. Everybody in Ireland is a storyteller, right? I'm going to generalize. I'm just going to put it out there. We're all storytellers. We're all very entertaining. It's just the way we are. But to be serious for a second, like we grew up hearing ghost stories. Halloween is Irish. It's an Irish festival, and ghost stories were an incredibly important part of Irish culture. Part of it was a way of understanding the world, like things that you scientifically couldn't understand were often understood with ghost stories and fairy lore and mythology and folk medicine and folk magic. And we retained that. And I did a podcast recently with some other Irish podcasters called This Paranormal Life. And they were laughing at the fact that we have become the ultimate Irish stereotype in that we've become storytellers.
Mm-hmm. So did you grow up like hearing a lot of ghost stories within your family? Were you just drawn to them when you were reading?
I used to love the Goosebumps series.
Yes.
I'm pretty sure that was a thing in America too. And
Oh, yeah.
terrified of them. Some of them I still remember to this day. But I loved anything spooky, anything ghostly. It's weird because my grandmother would tell me stories about fairies and fairy lore, always under the guise or in the context of, I mean, it's not real, but just in case, but you should always be careful, but you'd never know. So, ghost stories were a part of my life growing up, I suppose.
And so within the paranormal realm, what is your favorite topic?
Oh, this is such a good question. First of all, my first love is cryptozoology, right?
Yes.
Hook it to my veins. I love cryptozoology. Like, it's just so fun. And ultimately, do I believe that Bigfoot is real? Potentially not. Would I be delighted if somebody found him? Absolutely, yes. I'd be so happy. Or the Loch Ness Monster. Somebody find her. I want to see that these things are real. So cryptozoology is my number one. I do also love fairy lore. I think fairy lore is absolutely fascinating and weirdly terrifying at times.
Yeah, I didn't really know until more recently how sinister fairies could be. The fairies that I grew up with were all kind of Tinkerbell fairies. And then I realized like, whoa, this is not where the lore started at all.
No, and when I was a kid, stories about fairies were they would kidnap you in the night and take you away and replace you with a changeling. Or if you crossed the fairies, they would ruin your life, make your family destitute. Like, they were scary, and they kind of still are.
Is there an Irish cryptid?
Yeah, so we've got one of our cryptids that I love is a giant otter. Huge otter that like can kill people.
Oh my
God.
God.
When I did an episode about this giant otter, I think it's called the Door Coo. So many people messaged me to be like, oh no, that thing's real. I saw it in this lake at this time. Or, my grandmother lives on the Aprile Island and she has seen this giant otter creature. And I was like, wow, I love cryptozoology.
Yeah, I think there's something about it. It's more mystical, but it doesn't feel as like sinister to my everyday life, probably because I don't spend a lot of time hiking and outdoors. And that's also a note for myself. I should spend more time outside.
Or you shouldn't.
or maybe I shouldn't. But yeah, I never really feel directly threatened by them. But I do like the idea that they exist.
And that's it. If you turned on the news tomorrow morning and it was like, Bigfoot has been proven to be real, you'd be like, wow, that's fine. I can go about my day.
He's not near me.
Yeah, he's not going to appear in my bedroom in the middle of the night, so it's fine. Don't worry about it.
Exactly. We're going to talk ghosts today, which is your forte.
That is my forte. I love a ghost story.
And so I guess maybe this is the perfect time to ask you, have you experienced a ghost before?
Yes, I have.
Basically, we're going to play Emma's ghost story next. And do you want to set the stage any?
this story took place in an old Victorian lunatic asylum. And everything that you picture in your brain when you hear old Victorian lunatic asylum, yes. To the point where one day when I was in work, the fire alarm was going off and we realized it was because something had triggered it in the basement. I didn't know there was a basement.
Oh God, not a hidden basement.
And there were shackles on the walls in the basement. And we were like, okay, let's hightail it out of here. So everything you think about Victorian lunatic asylum, yes, absolutely.
Okay, incredible. So we'll play this first story and then we'll discuss.
Cool. My name is Emma and my story happened to me when I was in my early 20s. And I'm now 34 years old and still when I tell this story, when I think about this story, I still get tears in my eyes. So to go right back to the beginning, when I was 17 years old, I started working in a facility that was once called the Maryborough Lunatic Asylum. I grew up in Ireland and this particular building was in the Midlands in Ireland. It was built in the 1830s. Care for people with intellectual disabilities or mental health difficulties in the 1800s had not been good. Men and women and children who did not seem to fit societal norms were often placed into places like Maryborough Lunatic Asylum. I would like to think that the people who worked in these places predominantly did the best that they could with the tools and the information that they had. But I don't think it's true in 100% of cases. And unfortunately, because we didn't know very much about mental health, patients were often treated quite badly. There was a book written about this particular institution called something like When the Walls Came Tumbling Down. Because around the building there used to be these huge 10 to 12 foot walls. And because patients were unmedicated, all the people of the town knew were these 10-foot walls, and behind them there would be people screaming. And that was all they knew of this mental health facility. And as the years went by, the facility changed and it became much more humane and practices changed. And ultimately, I began working there when I was 17 years old. And the part of the building that I worked in was the building for adults with intellectual disabilities. It was a residential care home, and another part of the building was still being used as a psychiatric hospital. Large parts of the building at this point were unused, or they were used as office or storage space. Just before I started working there had been some whisperings of an incident. The nighttime staff were beginning to report some really strange occurrences, and they were struggling to work the nighttime shift. Now, the building was laid out over 3 floors, and the top floor was locked and unused at nighttime. And nighttime staff were reporting that they were hearing furniture being dragged around upstairs. They were hearing footsteps running around on the top floor. And they would go and check, and all the doors would be locked. There would be nobody inside. Obviously, because of the nature of the hospital, they were obliged to go and check whenever they heard these kinds of noises. There was one particular night where 2 nurses were working and heard the sounds of movement upstairs and decided that they would go together to check and see what was going on the top floor. So they got to the top floor, they unlocked the doors, they went in, and they turned on all the lights. Furniture had been moved around, but there was no living being on that floor besides from them. They couldn't see anybody that was there that could have been responsible for moving around the furniture. And one of the nurses told me himself that he was standing next to the panel of light switches that controlled the lights for the floor. And he watched as each individual light flicked off, plunging them into complete darkness. And they decided, no. They'd done enough investigating, that was enough for them. They locked up and they went back downstairs. This became so prevalent and happened so often that a priest was called in to do, I guess what you would call an exorcism mass, to try and clear the top floor of any spirits that were said to be lingering. And it was around this time that I started working there. As a 17-year-old, I went into work very, very green, didn't really know the lay of the land. And I used to work on the top floor on my own all the time. Sometimes, if I was walking down particular corridors, I would feel that itchy feeling like somebody was watching me. And I would move a lot quicker through those corridors because I would feel that feeling that I just wasn't alone. But aside from that, everything was pretty standard. There didn't seem to be anything ghostly that was happening. But the incident that changed all that for me happened when I'd been working there for maybe about 4 years. And it was a Monday morning. It had snowed. And it was a really cold, crisp morning. And it was about 10 a.m. And I had snuck out for a cigarette because I wasn't supposed to be on my break, but I had snuck out. And I was leaning against the wall with another girl, smoking a cigarette, and I looked up at the building in front of me, an office building, and this was a bank holiday Monday, so the offices were closed. It was locked. I knew that, and I looked up at the building, and in the third floor, in the middle window, there was a woman looking back at me. And I remember the feeling of my stomach swooping, that horrible dropping sensation in your stomach. Clearly my brain or my psyche immediately knew that something was wrong. And I didn't think too deeply about it in that exact moment, in that exact second. We looked at each other for a good couple of seconds. This wasn't like a fleeting glance, and I can still see her now as I'm telling this story. I looked up at her, she looked back at me, and then she drifted away from the window. And the next thing I knew, the girl that had been next to me had ran. She was trying to get her key into the door to get back into the building. And I went after her and I said, "What is it? What's wrong?" And she said, "Did you not see that girl? Did you not see that girl in the window?" And I said, "Well, yeah, I did see her." We had seen the same thing. It was a girl. I could tell that she was relatively young, maybe in her 20s. She had long black hair. She seemed to be wearing some sort of shift dress, like a white dress. She was incredibly pale, and she had dark black hollows instead of eyes. To this day, seeing her in my mind's eye makes my eyes fill with tears. I was freaked. The girl that was with me was freaked, but I was trying to keep a level head. And I said, okay, I'm going to go get security because the building was locked. We knew there shouldn't be anybody in there. If there was a patient in there, they shouldn't be in there. If there was a member of public in there, they shouldn't be in there, etc. So I went and got security and I explained what had happened. And I said, I've just seen somebody in the child and family offices, a woman. I need you to check. They went and checked. There was nobody there. And every door in the building was code locked, which meant that over the bank holiday weekend, if anybody had tried to get into that building or if anybody was moving around in that building, the alarms would be going off. There were no alarms. But I knew I had seen that woman, and the girl that was with me had seen her too. And about a year later, we were on the ward and we were discussing ghost stories, spooky stories, that kind of thing. And somebody said, "Oh, Emma, tell your story about what happened when you saw the girl in Child and Family." And I told my story. I told everybody that was there about the woman that I had seen in the window and how terrifying it was, and the black hollows for eyes and the dark hair and the white dress. And one of the nurses that was listening to the story rolled up his sleeve and his entire arm was goosebumps. All the hairs were standing on end. And I said, what is it? Has it really frightened you, the story? And he looked at me really serious and he said, "I see her all the time." So he used to work the night shift very regularly. And he said that when he was in the nurse's station, which was essentially a glass office that was in the middle of the dormitory so you could keep an eye on the patients while they slept, he had seen the blur of a woman with dark hair and a white night dress run past the window really quickly. And of course, because he was a nurse in charge of a number of patients, he assumed that it was a patient who was out of bed, and he got out to check. He checked all the patients and they were all in their beds. He checked where this woman had run to and there was nobody there. And this would happen regularly while he was working the night shift. But he had never told anybody because he was afraid that he was just imagining things. I stopped working in that building not long after that, and that particular part of the building is now no longer in use. But I do regularly wonder who she was and whether people continue to see her to this day.
This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Fiscally responsible, financial geniuses, monetary magicians. These are things people say about drivers who switch their car insurance to Progressive and save hundreds. Visit Progressive.com to see if you could save. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Potential savings will vary, not available in all states or situations.
Holiday magic is in the air, and DSW's got all the shoes to make your season extra merry. Believe, you've got parties to attend and lists to check twice, so DSW is taking care of the details, like gifts to make their eyes all aglow, styles that bring joy to your world, brands everyone wants, like UGG, Nike, Birkenstock, and more, and deals to make your budget bright. Find the perfect shoes for you and yours at a DSW store near you or dsw.com.
Hey, I'm Ryan Reynolds.
Recently, I asked Mint Mobile's legal team if big wireless companies are allowed to raise prices due to inflation. They said yes. And then when I asked if raising prices technically violates those onerous two-year contracts, they said, "What the f*** are you talking about, you insane Hollywood ass?" So to recap, we're cutting the price of Mint Unlimited from $30 a month to just $15 a month.
Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
$45 upfront payment equivalent to $15 per month. New customers on first 3-month plan only. Taxes and fees extra. Speed slower above 40 gigabytes. See details.
Nothing delivers comfort and joy quite like the unrivaled quality and taste of Omaha Steaks. It's guaranteed perfection in every single bite. And right now, you can save on unforgettable gifts with 50% off site-wide at omahasteaks.com. Plus, score an extra $30 off with promo code HOLIDAY. With 5 generations of experience, they consistently deliver the world's best steak experience. And the gifting experts at Omaha Steaks have made it easy to deliver the perfect gift with thoughtfully curated gift packages featuring gourmet favorites. From legendary steaks to mouth-watering desserts and more. Save 50% off site-wide for a limited time at omahasteaks.com. Plus, our listeners get an extra $30 off with promo code HOLIDAY. That's 50% off at omahasteaks.com. And an extra $30 off with promo code HOLIDAY. Minimum purchase may apply.
This is the scariest thing that's ever happened to me. I'm very good at compartmentalizing. But every so often somebody will send in a story to my podcast where they'll talk about, I saw something with, black hollows for eyes, and it will bring me right back to that moment.
Yeah.
I have never found an explanation, and I really did at the time try and find a rational explanation for what I saw.
Do you think part of this is the inspiration for why you do ghost storytelling now?
Yeah, I think so. And I still don't say that I believe in ghosts. You know, I still am not somebody who says, yeah, I'm a believer. I 100% believe in the paranormal. It was such a strange experience. And to find out, you know, literally a year later that another man working in the building had seen this woman and had seen her regularly, it kind of blew my mind a little bit. And I think for him, it was validation that he was actually seeing something too.
Yeah.
That works. That's a double-edged sword, right? Because you get the validation, but you also get the, oh no, I am actually seeing this. This is horrendous and terrifying. And it makes me think of how many other people out there have strange and wonderful experiences, but they just don't talk about them because they're like, well, I don't really believe in this sort of stuff. So I'm just going to bury this deep down somewhere and pretend it didn't happen.
So it's more like you like the stories, you want to believe or something like that, but you just remain a skeptic in your day-to-day life?
Yeah, I think I would call myself an open-minded skeptic.
I think that's how I'd categorize myself too.
Yeah, when people send me in stories, I never sit and try and debunk people's paranormal experiences because fundamentally, these people have experienced something and it has impacted them. Mm-hmm. And whether that's psychological, whether it's sleep paralysis, whether, you know, all the different reasons that we could go through for why people have paranormal experiences, they're still having them and it's still impacting them. And it's important to recognize that and allow people the space to be able to talk about that safely. So I would call myself an open-minded skeptic.
I do kind of believe in hearing a lot of these stories that the veil is thinner for some people because of like what they're going through emotionally. And I don't know if that's more psychological than it is paranormal, but it doesn't really matter because you're still seeing what you're seeing. So does it really matter? You know?
Yeah, exactly. Like how many stories start with, I was in a really poor relationship at the time, or, you know, when people have experiences when they're children, they will often say, my mom and dad were getting divorced or
fighting.
There was a lot of negative energy between the humans in the household. Is it purely psychological or is it that the veil is thinner for some people in those situations?
Yeah.
I don't know. And like you, I sort of often think it doesn't really matter.
It doesn't really matter. And I do think it's interesting that there's rarely a mass ghost sighting, you know? It's like, it's a very personal, typically one-on-one, maybe like two-on-one kind of experience. But I think that is why people are so drawn to it. It's like you're scared or fascinated because you are alone in the experience. And, you know, I think that the psychological paranormal link is really interesting.
Yeah.
Does it make you feel better that you had someone there to corroborate that with?
Oh my God, yes. Absolutely.
I'm always so curious about that.
Yeah. And it made me feel like, okay, I did just see that. Mm-hmm. I did just see that person in the window. Okay, that wasn't just me. That wasn't just in my head. That definitely happened because she's seen it too. It happened. We both saw it.
Wow. And then you were talking about not knowing exactly who she was and you tried to figure it out. I'm super curious about like your investigation, if you will, into this. And why do you think you saw her then?
This is a really tricky question.
I would be turning it over in my mind 1,000 times.
Yes. And I have always wondered why at that moment at 10 o'clock in the morning, random, what a random time. Why are you not there in the middle of the night like a normal ghost, you know?
Like a normal ghost.
And I've had a lot of experiences with psychics. I'm not necessarily the biggest believer in psychics, but I did have a psychic tell me before that the reason that this entity appeared to me and to this girl that was with me was because of our ages. So we were young women. I was early 20s max. And this psychic suggested that the reason she appeared to us because of our age was that she had been committed into the asylum at a similar age. And the psychic also suggested that she had been committed into the asylum because she had gotten pregnant out of wedlock. If you know anything about Irish history, that was an incredibly common occurrence, that young women who got pregnant outside of wedlock would be locked away indefinitely, sometimes forever.
You know, isn't there like a Joni Mitchell song about this?
Oh, potentially. I don't know.
I have kind of heard about this history through some pop culture.
Yeah, it's a really dark and difficult part of Irish history that only really came to light publicly in the 90s. Just to put that into context, the Spice Girls were at number one when the last Magdalene Laundry closed. That's what they were called. And yeah.
That's the song. Joni Mitchell has a song called The Magdalene Laundries. And that's where I first heard about this. I was like, what is the Magdalene Laundries?
Yes. So imagine it's that recent that the last Magdalene Laundry closed.
It was functioning at that time?
Yeah. They were still functioning. Yeah. I don't want to get too much into it, but that would mean that young girls who got pregnant out of wedlock, regardless of the circumstances, they could have been assaulted. Awful things happened. And the church decreed that this was such a deep shame on the family that these girls would be locked away, often in places called Magdalene Laundries, where they would work often for the rest of their lives, never allowed to leave. Their babies were taken and sold to people, often in America. I mean, it's deep and dark and horrible and grim. And, you know, the Irish community are still coming to terms with the reality of what happened. So while I could see what the psychic was saying, I was like, okay, you know, that's a possibility. I don't know if there's any truth in that. I had no way of accessing the records of the patients that had been committed to the asylum over the years. So I'm probably never going to know who this person was or why she appeared to me and this other girl.
Do you think you could recognize her without the hollows of her eyes? Like, is her face burned in your mind?
I don't think I could. I think if she walked past me in the street without hollows for eyes, I don't think I would be able to pick her out. She was so sort of shadowy, like sort of almost black and white, you know, with her black hollow eyes, long dark hair. She was definitely wearing a white dress, but I wouldn't be able to pick her out from a lineup now. No way.
Wow.
But other than that, I haven't really had any other paranormal experiences. And I've been, you know, through the podcast, I've been to some spooky places. I've been to, you know, places that are supposed to be really active, and nothing has really happened to me except that one incident.
I guess I'm glad that you haven't had another one, unless that's something you want.
No, not particularly. I could do without it, to be honest.
You've had enough.
Yeah, I've had enough. Lots of people go searching for paranormal experiences. I don't need to know.
Same.
I don't want to know. I don't need them. Stay away. Not interested.
Now time for some ads. I'd love to share one of our stories with you. And I think it goes nicely in the tone because it's also told by a person who's not a believer.
Oh, I'm excited. I can't wait to hear it.
Okay, amazing. Here we go. We'll listen.
Back in about 1993 or 1994, my wife and I were renting a condo on what was considered the west side of Chula Vista, California. We were about 23 years old at the time, and my full-time job was being a correctional officer at the San Diego City Jail. However, I was also just hired as a reserve San Diego police officer and was attending the San Diego Regional Police Academy at night. My schedule was full. I was either working at the jail or attending the academy most days of the week. Shortly after moving into our condo, my wife began raising concerns about weird things happening around the condo. She would tell me about hearing footsteps when I was away, or incidents of the lights or water turning on downstairs. Our daughter Justine, who was around 2 at the time, would not want to be alone in her bedroom and would cry and scream when we tried to put her in her crib. Justine was our first child, so initially we really didn't understand or recognize the difference between tantrum crying and what we later realized was fear. She would scream so loud that we would eventually have to take her out of her room to sleep with us, day and night. There were many instances when my wife would suddenly grab my shorts or shirt in the middle of the night and swear that someone was in the room. She would insist that she either heard someone or saw a shadow.
but I would always do my best to reassure her that nobody was there. I would usually get home from the police academy around 10:30 or 11 at night, and I would wind down on the couch for an hour or so before going to bed. On the night of our incident, I had injured my shoulder at the academy, so I stayed downstairs on the couch for a little longer than normal, just watching TV. When I watched TV, I did it in the dark. That particular night, I fell asleep right there on the couch, which I normally didn't do. I suddenly woke up. The TV was still on, but all the downstairs lights were on as well. I remember being really confused about the lights being on, but figured my wife had come down to check on me when I hadn't come up to bed. When I finally got up to bed, I remember trying to get to sleep, but my shoulder was hurting so bad I couldn't find a comfortable position. At the time, and to this day, I have always been a stomach sleeper. I finally rolled over on my back, and when I found a position that alleviated the pain, I closed my eyes for the night. I don't think I had my eyes closed for more than 5 minutes when I felt a presence in the bedroom. I didn't hear anything, I just felt like I wasn't alone. I opened my eyes, and that's when I saw our ghost. I remember being on my back and seeing a shirtless male crouching over me. He was just slightly below my waist, somewhere in between a deep squat and a mount. The instant I saw him, because he was so clear, I thought we were being burglarized or the victims of a hot prowl. I had a department-issued handgun that I kept half sticking out of my mattress, parallel to my head when I slept. A million things were running through my mind at that split second, and I was trying to formulate a plan of how to quickly disable this person without injury to myself or my family. It was probably only a couple seconds, but it seemed like we were staring at each other forever. And I swear, the person crouching over me looked exactly like David Koresh, the cult leader from Waco, Texas. He had shoulder-length curly hair, large wire-rimmed glasses, and he was shirtless, wearing only a pair of blue jeans. The subject was smirking at me in a way that I can only describe as him knowing he had the position of advantage over me. I remember quickly looking to my left side and seeing my daughter sleeping between me and my wife. I thought about reaching for my firearm, but I thought that if I rolled over to get it, he would choke me from behind or something worse. We probably stared frozen at each other for about 10 or 15 seconds before I just decided to fight. I quickly lunged upward at the subject and swung as hard as I could at his face with a closed fist. My fist went right through him, and I was left sitting upwards towards the foot of my bed. I remember having a huge adrenaline dump, and I could feel my heart racing, and my breathing was heavy. As I sat there, I began the internal questioning of, what the fuck just happened? Everything was so real, but I think I wanted to convince myself that it wasn't, and maybe it was just dreaming. I sat for about 10 or 20 seconds going over every detail when I suddenly felt a presence again. I looked at my right, past my sleeping family, and out the bedroom door, where I saw him again. This time he was inside of our hallway bathroom, with just his head peeking around the door. He looked at me for about 5 seconds, then pulled back out of sight. At that point, I knew my wife was right. We had a ghost. I crawled back towards my wife and child, and quietly woke my wife out of her sleep. I said, "Yvette, you were right. We have a ghost. I just saw it." At that point, Yvette let out a mild shriek. We jumped out of bed, turned the lights on, and the three of us were glued to each other for whatever time it took to grab the bare essentials and get the hell out of the condo. We drove straight to my mother's house. It was probably about 4 a.m. when we showed up at her door and told her we had left our condo because it was haunted. We stayed with my mother for a little while, then we eventually moved in with my mother-in-law until we found another place to live. It was a very stressful time because I was still at the police academy and I was fearful that somehow they would find out what happened. In order to become a police officer, I had to pass a battery of physical and mental aptitude tests, which included a psychological exam, as well as multiple sit-down interviews with a police psychologist. I was always in fear that our landlord would somehow contact the police department and tell them that we had broken our lease because of an alleged ghost. Crazy enough, our landlord took no issue with our story and let us out of our lease without any penalties. Yvette and I went back to the condo a couple of times to get our belongings. I remember doing a final vacuum of the condo with Yvette holding onto the back of my t-shirt. Our neighbors also told us that they had known of a ghost that made his way through the condos. They said that our closet doors would rattle loudly whenever we were away. I eventually became a police officer in the same city where the haunted condo is located, Chula Vista. I have responded to many calls for service at the complex, and I always tell my story to my partners when we're on the property. One of the coworkers was obsessed with the story and did some research on the land. He told me that part of the complex was once a small cemetery, but I never did any follow-up on my own. I'm just glad to not live there anymore.
That was great.
Yeah, well, I think what's interesting about this story is the similarities in not really expecting a ghost like you experienced, then kind of the quick departure, which sounds more like your friend you were with when you were smoking a cigarette. Truly, I love the visual of the family like clinging to each other, going to every room, grabbing their stuff, and then just moving out.
Just the end. We're not staying here.
Yes. And honestly, I think it's refreshing to hear because I don't know how many stories you hear like this, and I'm sure it's a ton. A lot of people stay.
Yeah. And because they don't have anywhere else to go or they can't afford to move out or whatever. So they're just stuck there.
Yeah. And I think some people, they're just kind of like, oh, okay, I guess I live with a ghost.
Yeah. There's just a ghost in my house now. That's just who I am.
But the crouching over you in bed, it's like that takes it a step further from like at the foot of the bed. You know, it's too close for me.
Also, David Koresh.
I actually looked this up too. I was like,
he is on my screen right now.
Yeah. And the only thing I can really think of there is like sometimes there's like a loving reason for a ghost to be around, but sometimes there's like a purgatory reason. And that's what I would think for this, except for this was in California. It's not super far away from where he would have been when he died, but it's not super close either. But I don't know if it is David Koresh. I guess he's punished to a life of crouching over police officers or something.
But equally, that sort of look of the mullety curly hair and the big glasses was very big in the 80s. So it might not necessarily have been David Koresh, but he is a strong point of reference. This man looked like David Koresh. I immediately had a vision in my mind of what that ghost looks like. I immediately was like, oh no. Oh, this is worse than, the hag that people see. This is like, nobody wants to wake up and see David Koresh over them. No,
it's almost not old enough. Like it sounds like the ghost you saw was probably more the white dress, the flowing dark hair.
She felt more Victorian.
And in some ways that feels better to me than a ghost too recently in time, like a 90s ghost, an 80s ghost.
Yeah.
Just feels a little bit more uncanny valley to me.
Yes, it does.
Like, I understand he didn't at first know it was a ghost. He was like, it's an intruder.
Yeah. And I'd written down sleep paralysis, right? Because, you hear it first and you think He's lying down on his back. Famously, sleep paralysis often happens to people when they're lying on their back.
Yep.
And he said, he felt a presence in the room. And I was thinking, this is sleep paralysis. David Koresh is an interesting sleep paralysis demon, but we'll
take it.
Nonetheless.
Some people get the Hat Man. Some people get David Koresh.
It's the look of the draw, really. I was like, okay. This is a very detailed sleep paralysis story, but sleep paralysis nonetheless. But then he saw him again. And his head was peeking around the door. I was like, no, let's rewind. Let's not add that detail in because I don't want to know about that.
Exactly.
Gave me the heebie-jeebies. Anything peeking around the door, right, is grim. If you want to, David Koresh, if you want to haunt people, you haunt people full on, full body.
Plain view. Full body haunting or nothing.
No.
I felt the same way. Something's over you. Sleep paralysis.
Yeah, sleep paralysis.
But I haven't heard a sleep paralysis story that then ventured into another room combined with the wife feeling something too. It's a more compelling ghost story than, is it sleep paralysis? It's like, is everyone experiencing communal sleep paralysis in this family?
Including the wee girl who won't be in the bedroom. Like, is she seeing, I keep saying David Koresh because now I'm just, in my head, it's just David Koresh. Is the wee girl seeing this ghost and that's why she's freaking out, not wanting to be in the room? We had footsteps, lights turning on and off. There's a lot going on here.
And I think leaving was the right choice.
Yes.
I'm out.
I would go too.
And I also think it's worth bringing up that the landlord let them out of their lease very easily.
I wrote that down.
Yeah.
Landlord let them out of the lease? ? I've rented a lot of houses over the years, and let me tell you, I've never met a landlord who would let you out of a lease without any question, without any fine, without any charge. Did that landlord know something?
That's what it sounds like. He was kind of surprised he let him out of the lease. And I don't think the landlord would let you out of the lease if you just had some sleep paralysis. So,
and I do feel like if you woke up and you had something crouching over you, right, whether it's David Koresh, whether it's a hag, whether it's the Hat Man, whatever it is, you can say this is sleep paralysis. You can convince yourself. The next morning when you get up, you can go, that really scary thing happened, but it was just sleep paralysis. I am okay. This is fine. You can't sleep paralysis your way out of the rest of the details of this story.
No. And this guy sounds like he's like a tough training to be a cop, like sleeps with a gun under his pillow type of guy. It's like, if someone like that is scared, there's a good chance I would be like 10 to 15 times more scared.
Yeah, I would just dissolve on the spot.
And now a word from our sponsors. Okay, so then I also ask everyone on Rattled and Shook, choose either one of these. Either what was your childhood fear or what is your irrational fear? Give you an example. Mine is sharks in the swimming pool. Yeah. Like that was my childhood irrational fear. I thought when I was in a swimming pool, there could be and would be sharks.
Was that post Jaws?
You know, I actually think I did go to the aquarium a lot as a kid, and there was a big shark tank in New Orleans. There was a footbridge that went over the shark tank. And when I was in like first grade, I remember a news story where they were taking a tour of people across the footbridge over the shark tank, and the footbridge gave out and all the people fell into the shark tank. And I think I heard that story when I was a kid and just imagined a pool of sharks. Like literally, that is what it is. Not the ocean. You know, I just assumed they could live anywhere. So I was terrified.
Yeah, that's reasonable, I think. That's not, I wouldn't say that was wholly irrational after that story.
I appreciate that.
Mine was and kind of still is being abducted by aliens.
Classic. So you're a fear, because I think some people want it. Some people are like, abduct me.
Some people are like, I want to know what it feels like. Go to therapy. Do that
and
instead.
Also what feels like.
Yeah.
I think there's too much of a question mark. Like, you want to be probed? Do you want to be beamed up? Like, what do you want? What do you want to feel? Do you want to feel their like weird otherworldly skin? I don't know what you want to feel.
And I only recently discovered where this came from because I've got a really irrational fear of aliens. I don't like alien stories. I often have nightmares about aliens. And I was like, where has this come from? And I always thought it was from E.T., the film, right? Because E.T. really scared me.
Yeah.
Understandably.
He freaked me out too. Yeah, the bit when he's half dead and he's gone all grey and stuff scared the life out of me. E.T. really frightened me. But I don't know if you've seen, there is a show on at the moment, I think it's on Netflix, called The Manhattan Abduction Story. You know, I actually just I haven't seen it, but I was with UFO lovers all weekend and they were talking about it.
It's good. I would recommend it. I think it's only 3 episodes long. And I realized watching that documentary that this woman's story is the reason that I have an irrational, morbid fear of being abducted by aliens. Because back in the 90s, she was on Ricki Lake. Do you remember that TV show?
Yes, I do know Ricki Lake.
And I remember the interview with this woman where she was silhouetted behind a screen and she was talking about waking up and seeing this creature at the end of her bed. And she freaked out. She was like throwing things at it. And then she's being beamed out of this big New York apartment building, right? And I remember being a child and being like, why is nobody panicking about this? That aliens
this needs to be an emergency.
Yeah, there needs to be an emergency meeting somewhere between this and, quicksand and acid rain. Like, I can't leave the house.
No, you can't leave the house. Not with acid rain.
No.
Is this the same story that's in the Manhattan documentary you're talking about?
It's the same story. That same clip from Ricki Lake came on the documentary, and I am watching it transported back to my 5-year-old self being like, this is the reason, this literal clip is the reason why I am so frightened of aliens. I even rang my mom and I was like, do you fucking remember this story on Ricki Lake? And she was like, no, I don't remember it at all. And I was like, I do. And the interesting thing is that the documentary is about this woman's story, but ultimately it's about whether or not she's telling the truth.
Mm-hmm. And that's the beautiful mystery of UFOs.
Yes.
I don't know how much you followed like all the press conferences that were happening in the US around UAPs and all the ex-military people that claim to have seen things, but some of them sound severely messed up from whatever it is that they believe they've seen.
Yeah. These people have seen something.
Yes.
Whatever the explanation is, that's not for me to say. But I do think militarily, etc., there's stuff that we don't know about, and there's stuff that's being tested, and it has benefited governments in the past to say, oh yeah, it's probably UFOs. Weird, maybe alien spaceships. Definitely not stuff that we're testing.
Can't confirm.
Don't worry about it. Just don't think about it too much.
It really is interesting how much of the UFO UAP craze might just be the government's really being like, yes, actually double down on that. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Could be. Because they don't want the heat.
Yeah. Can't possibly be real.
The conspiracy goes deep.
I know.
Emma, it's been so great having you and having your insight into ghost stories and your amazing voice. So calming and perfect for storytelling. It's just been such a pleasure.
Oh, Meredith, it's been a joy. Thank you for having me. I've enjoyed every second of it.
And if people want to hear more from you, where should they look for you? And what would you suggest they listen to first?
Oh, good question. So my podcast is called Real Life Ghost Stories. If you search Real Life Ghost Stories, wherever you get your podcasts, you will find it. I'm also on social media. So I'm on TikTok at Real Life Ghost Stories. And I do, condensed versions of stories on there. I'm on Instagram at Real Life Ghost Stories. If you want to jump into some really spooky episodes, recently I did an episode called The Goblin. And I don't normally do this, but it's a similar structure to the way you do things in that I invited the person on to tell their story because it scared me so much. It kept me awake at night.
Oh, I'm going to listen to that one. The Goblin.
It's episode number 250. I would also recommend, if you want a kind of mystery story, Episode 248, which was released on September the 22nd, is about a girl called Eleanor Zugan, who was a Romanian girl who had loads of weird poltergeist activity around her. She was studied in a lab and nobody could figure out how it was happening or what was going on for her. So that was another good one that I did recently that I enjoyed. So those might be good ones to check out.
Okay, I'm pumped to check that out. And I haven't heard enough goblin stories, so I'm pretty excited about that.
Goblin stories really scare me. I just find them very disturbing. So if you want to be scared and sleep with the lights on, the goblin is a good one to go for.
Well, you're speaking my language. I frequently sleep with the lights on, so what's another night? Rattled and Shook is a Tenderfoot TV production in partnership with Odyssey. Executive producers are Donald Albright and Payne Lindsay. Co-executive producer is Meredith Stedman. Hosted and produced by April Ruha and Meredith Stedman. Lead editor and sound designer is April Ruha. Additional production, sound design, and mix master by Stephen Perez and Dayton Cole. Additional production by Sean Nerney. Production management by Tracy Kaplan and Jordan Foxworthy. Original score by Makeup and Vanity Set. Original art by Puppy Teeth. Follow us on social media at Rattled and Shook.
This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Fiscally responsible, financial geniuses, monetary magicians. These are things people say about drivers who switch their car insurance to Progressive and save hundreds. Visit Progressive.com to see if you could save. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Potential savings will vary. Not available in all states or situations.